Hey, y'all. Welcome to Simple Conversations. This is KJ.
Hey, and it's Alice. So pause us for a minute, grab you something to drink, come back, sit down, and be a part of this conversation.
Because we have a lot to say. Welcome to Simple Conversations. So, y'all, listen, this is our disclaimer. We're not here to give you any advice or tell you how to live your life.
Well, maybe just a little.
We're still trying to figure this thing out ourselves. Thanks for tuning in. Hey, y'all. Welcome back to Simple Conversations where grace meets strength. Hey, Alice.
Hey, KJ, how are you?
Really good. How are you?
I am good. The weather is beautiful, so I feel so much better.
Yes, it is springtime here in Eastern Virginia, and we are happy about that. Although we just got word that Friday it will be full-blown summertime.
I'm not ready for it.
I know, right? We just turned the heat off. Like we had the windows open yesterday, and then I guess, before the week is over, we're going to have to turn the AC on because, I'm 51 and hot.
Yeah,
I mean, like hormonally hot.
Yes.
Welcome to Virginia.
Yeah, hopefully it'll just be a day or two and it'll go away. And then give us at least a couple weeks of
yeah, I hope so. So for our listeners, today is March the 24th, 2021.
Mm-hmm.
So it is in the middle of the day and it's a gorgeous day. And once again, we are on Zoom. And I love that because I feel like I can be as close as I want to with y'all and we don't have to put on a mask and we are social distancing, right?
And I have to keep saying, what'd you say?
Exactly.
My classroom with
louder so I can hear you behind your mask.
Right. And my classroom, we wear masks still at school. And I often say to my students, what you say?
Yeah. Well, and look, it's even more challenging in the hair salon when you've got the blow dryer on and the mask on and the person.
Lips.
Yeah. Because I used to could read lips really good in the mirror, not with a mask on anymore.
Right. I understand you have to try to figure out what their eyes are saying.
It's the truth, right? Right. So listeners, we are so excited. We are in this series, Amazing Courageous Women. And my, haven't we met some amazing, courageous women?
Mm-hmm. I think we should do a recap too at the end of this season or series. And recap all the women that we have had as guests.
We absolutely need to do that. Put that on your list, okay? Miss Podcast Secretary.
Okay.
So, but however, we have interviewed some amazing, courageous women, but don't sit out on this series because today we have. Actually, she's been so busy. She was in our top 5, by the way, but she's been so busy that we are now just able to interview her. So she absolutely was at the top of our list of amazing, courageous women. So, but with that being said, we still have more to come. So this series, we have no idea how long this will go on, but we will continue until we can no longer find amazing, courageous women because the world is full of them, y'all. Okay. Yeah. Full of them doing big things, making impact on their world, right? Yeah.
Well, and for our listeners, if you have been listening to us for any length of time and you listened to one of our first podcasts that we did early on, we did a 2-part series on racism. And this guest was then one of our guests for that series as well. So yes. I am going to introduce my friend to you. She is a speaker. She's an author. She is a life coach. I consider her my life coach, just so you know, every coach needs a coach.
Yes.
She is prior military. She has spent her life empowering women, and that has just gone from one way of doing it to another way of doing it. And she just has continued to level up throughout her life. And actually throughout the time I've known her too. She has received the recipient from the FBI, which is a super cool award. She received their Directors Community Leadership Award for her work with human trafficking, which is where she and I met doing raising awareness for human trafficking. And I was trying to think this morning,
wow,
thinking 8 or 9 years ago. Like I had to stop and think how long I do it by houses now, not by deployments. I used to count life by deployments, and now I count it by where we lived. And we weren't in our home yet. We were still living in an apartment, and that's when we met. So it had to be 8 or 9 years ago. So listeners, welcome my friend, an amazing and courageous lady, Miss Chandra Moyer.
Yay, welcome.
Thank you, ladies. I'm so happy to be here. Really, it's just such an honor and privilege to join you again.
Yeah, we are
a beautiful smile. I'm so glad we're on Zoom.
Oh, it's right. I've been sort of secluded, with the COVID thing, but it's just nice to be able to feel like I'm starting to breathe air and get out again. And not always having to be masked up. So, we're in a different age category than y'all.
Well, and you're a nature girl anyway. So being able to be outside, I know for you is a big deal.
I love it. And I do love our community because it is kind of spaced out. So I can get out here and walk, and then go by the water. So I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah. So tell us about your new project.
Oh, well, let me just kind of back it up a little bit.
Okay.
About 3 years ago, I had stopped running. I was a CEO of a nonprofit, and I felt led to lay that down after about 8 years, raising awareness on human trafficking. I felt it was time to start writing my book, my story. And I had a therapist that told me years ago, Helen, and she's in heaven now, said that, I really think you need to write a book one day about your story. I think it's going to help many people. And so I started that about 2.5 years ago. I started writing it as a memoir, thinking that was the way to go.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got stuck, trying to remember dates and everything. And so I finally kind of transitioned into fiction. And basically, I met her before, is inspired by my story. And it tells a story of a woman who is living a contented life, unaware of hidden trauma, right? Until her adopted children are abruptly taken away. And this trauma shatters her emotionally, and it awakens memories of sexual abuse. So she begins this journey of finding out the truth and then connecting with the frightened child who suppressed what happened. And I wrote the story this way because I felt like when I was going through my healing at the time, there was just really no resources out there. There really weren't any books from therapists at the time. There weren't any books out from survivors. And my situation was a little different. I had no memories of the abuse before it was triggered, and then I had memories. So I wanted to put something out there that would help other people that were, that are going through the same thing. And I just talked to a couple of therapists recently, and they're still telling me there's not that much out there. So I think the novel was a better way of presenting the story. And then that way I can incorporate other people's stories in it.
Right.
When I wrote it. And so that's where I am right now. And the launch is April 21st. So we're down to 4 weeks.
Oh, wow. I'm so excited for that.
Thank you. I am too.
I already have some people that are close to me that I will send a copy of your book to because.
Awesome. Thank you.
I did experience some sexual trauma myself as a young teen, and then just different things in life, So reading your book, I'm going to say it was an easy read, but not an easy read. And I loved that you wrote it as a story, because I think that it just made it easier to read. I love that I wanted to find out what happened next. Can we say to Marcia? I wanted to know what happened next.
Yes, Marcia.
Marcia. Okay.
Yes.
I'm a Southern girl. We change everybody's name.
I know you change everything. You're entitled to. You're Southern.
Now I did get that her husband called her Sia. That I did,
yes.
But I would have called her Marcia. If I met her, I would have called her Marcia. Okay. Marcia. Like, but I loved her character in the book, and I related to so many of her struggles. And I think it's going to be hard for people to read it and not relate somewhere along the path.
And,
Yes.
I think it inspired, the Me Too movement inspired me. I saw, hundreds and thousands of women hit the streets for the first time, finding their voice. And I knew it was time to tell. And I have told bits of my story throughout the years. I spoke at conferences, I hosted conferences, and I would share parts of my story at those times, but I never really shared some of the other parts.
Right.
And I was holding back, and I felt the Lord was saying, now's not the time to hold back. Now's the time to really release this. And I think what I saw with the Me Too movement, I thought it was a powerful beginning. People finding their voice and acknowledging, yes, this happened to me. And there was strength in that.
Yeah.
To know that you're not alone, right? But I wanted to provide a step further. Okay, now what do I do now that I know this happened to me and I'm giving voice to it? That's the first step in healing.
Right.
So that was my purpose in providing this resource, this story, is to give some ideas of different variations of healing. There's no one right way to heal, right? And there really isn't one right way to heal. Now, we may have certain principles in the healing journey. So this is another one, and I really dive into the spirituality of healing in my book. And I think all these modalities are important. There's so many out there now. I mean, when I went through it, I'm going to tell my age, but when I went through it, I was in my mid-30s, which is about 30 years ago. And there wasn't a lot out there. We didn't have the brain science and neuroscience, the brain of trauma like we do now. We didn't have the EMDR, the different modalities. So I think it's really neat that the conversation has lent itself to this place now, and that trauma is such a buzzword right now, if you've noticed.
Right.
It's just kind of everywhere. Trauma in the classroom, trauma. So I think it's really being heightened. And let's not talk about this past year of the pandemic, right? There's a lot of trauma happening with our kids and schools. So it's important to understand and what that looks like. It's different. And how do we walk it out, and how do we deal with it? How do we heal from it?
Yeah.
And I do believe there is healing, that you can heal from trauma. I will say for myself, when I first started, I had a lot of triggers, a lot of flashbacks. And the flashbacks are just horrendous. And you really you never know when one's going to happen. You don't know initially, and you just have to learn how to work with it and ride the wave with it. Eventually that subsided for me completely. I don't have any fun, but triggers are they're still like reminders that maybe there's something still left unresolved, if that makes sense.
Okay.
And so triggers are a little different, and I can go long periods of time now without a trigger, sometimes years, and then sometimes something will happen. And I just want to share, because we had talked about this before coming on, just recently, 2 weeks ago. I'm getting more healing even as I've written my story and I'm putting it out here. And one of the things that happened was TP asked me about 2 or 3 weeks ago, he says, have you heard anything about your dad recently? And I was a little irritated that he asked me that question. I'll be honest,
because if I'm not thinking about it, I don't want to think about it.
Well, and I don't ever think about him. And the funny thing is I said, that's interesting, you should ask that. He said, well, you talked to your sister. I said, well, she knows not to talk about him with me. And so I have not seen my father in 30 years. For those who are listening, I was sexually abused by my father starting at the age of 14 months until I was 16 years of age. And I left home at 8. My parents divorced at 16. I left home to go to college at 18. I was an overachiever. 4 years of college, joined the military, went in as an officer. And I went on with my life like everything was perfect. Everything was like if you had met me back then, I would have said I came from a perfect childhood. My parents were there for me. They supported me. You would never guess that I had this trauma behind me. And trauma can be so impactful that you don't even realize. For myself, I had buried it so deeply, I even hid it from myself. So it's called dissociative amnesia. And So I say all that to say, now here we are, fast forward. My husband asked me the question about my dad. That night I go to sleep and I have a dream. And in the dream, a baby was being born. And we were waiting for the birth of the baby. And it seemed like there was complications. So I went outside, stepped outside the door to find the nurse. And I asked her, is the baby okay? And she said, oh, the baby's been born. It's fine, but he's not going to make it. And I knew she was talking about my father, my dad. And I stood outside the door and I paused and I said, I want to see him. I'm ready now. And I walked into the room and I could see a figure on the bed. It was a dim lit room, hospital room. I walked in the room, sat down, and I slipped my hand in his and I said, I forgive you.
Wow.
I forgive you for everything. And the moment I said that, this bitter sob erupted out of me. And I woke up in that state where I was like covering my mouth, sobbing loudly because I didn't want to wake TP up, my husband. And I slipped out of bed and I'm just sobbing and just releasing all this stuff. And I let it go, I let it go. And I finally came back to bed and I said to him, I didn't know if he was awake or whatever. I said, hey, I had this dream. I was waiting to see if he would, answer me or whatever.
Right.
And he said, are you going to tell me about it? So I tell him, and again, I'm just releasing and I'm sobbing. I felt this divine transaction happened. Now, I had positioned myself to heal years ago, but you cannot make it happen. You can't make forgiveness happen. You can't, you can mantra it. The Christian world likes to just push that on someone. And I tell you, when you're broken and you're hurting and you're coming to someone and you're saying, this happened to me, the last thing you need to freaking hear is that you need to forgive them.
Thank you. Say that one more time.
The last thing you need to freaking hear is to say, phone someone to tell you, because first of all, as a believer, you already know that.
Right.
You need someone there to validate for you your pain. And especially if you have held it in for so many years, you're ashamed of whatever, and then you finally open up and you release it, and that's what you hear, that'll shut down some healing.
Right.
So as Christians, the best thing we can do is say, I'm so sorry that happened to you. That wasn't your fault. I'm listening. And we can apply that to sexual abuse, the whole climate now with this anti-racism thing, whether it's Black or Asian or whatever, we can apply that same principle to that, right? So I just had that wonderful transaction and I couldn't believe it's on the eve of releasing my book. And it was like this weight, another layer of healing was released. And I share that for someone out there that's listening that may feel guilty because they haven't forgiven that person who's hurt them so badly. And they might be trying hard and working because that's the quote Christian thing to do. The best thing you can do is just go walk out the healing process, get the stuff out that needs to come out, be gentle with yourself, be kind to yourself, patient with yourself. And know in time that it'll happen. God is not going to love you any less.
That's right. That's so good.
Because you haven't forgiven someone who has hurt you.
Right.
He knows the pain. He knows what it's taken for you to even walk this journey of healing. He's just so loving and compassionate. And if that can help free somebody today.
Right. Yeah. That's our heart.
To let that go.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So it brings me to a few questions. So give us some ways that people can get the pain out from all years of experience of you, not only going through your own, but working with other people as well. What are some ways that actual practical tools that people can do that?
Practically, one of a wonderful tool is journaling. There were times that I journaled because I was too ashamed to speak what I was remembering. And so there's something about journaling and getting your emotions down on paper that's free. I would say that's one way. Another way, if you have a trusted friend or someone that you can confide in. Therapists are great. I could not have gone on this journey without a therapist.
Right.
Now as time went on, I had gained tools and I can work through some emotions. Like if that had come up maybe earlier in my healing years ago, I would have been calling my therapist, and saying, I need a session. And that's okay. But I've come to a place to know that the worst thing we can do is keep it in, hold it in. Like I could have really forced that and tried to gulp that down the other night. Right.
Right.
And that would have not done anything in the progression of healing. And I think we've all done that, swallowed that down, held it back. So that would be another tool, is the writing is such, I think, very key. Sometimes just breathing when I am feeling like I've been triggered with something, just taking a moment and taking deep breaths. And it's almost like, it's hard to explain it for someone that hasn't been through it, whether it's a flashback or a trigger, especially. It's almost like you have to ride a wave. Like, grief, you think of grief, right? And so the wave of grief comes. What's the worst thing you can do is to hold it in, right? It's just, you got to cry and you ride that wave out. Right. And then it subsides. You feel at the time, I feel like you ride that wave out and it subsides until the next one. But when we're in the middle of it, you feel like it's not going to end. So you're afraid to go into the wave, right? You tend to hesitate and hold back because you think, oh, if I start crying, I'm not going to ever stop. But you do.
Right.
And then there's this, go ahead.
One of the things that I tell clients when they're in pain and working with them is, you already feel the pain. It already sucks to feel what you're feeling right now. It's going to suck to keep feeling it as you process through it, but it's not going to suck when you get to the other side.
Yeah, man. Oh, it's such a wonderful release. Yeah.
Yeah. So it hurts. Absolutely. It's difficult. It's challenging. It's all of those words, all those emotions, but you're feeling it anyway.
Yes.
So let's do something productive to work past it so we don't have to always feel that.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's really good. Yeah.
The other question that came to mind when you were talking about how the church sometimes wants to rush people to forgiveness. Where do you think that comes from?
That's a very good question. Just my history with the church. It's almost like we feel like when we come to the kingdom, everything is fixed, everything is done. We're a new creation, we're a new creature, right? That's what we're kind of taught. And so, but I tell people, I said, yeah, you come, but you still got the mole on you. You still have a bruise here. You still, there's still parts of you in your soul that's where the transformation happens, right? And so part of that feeling, just feeling like we got to hurry. I think it has something to do sometimes with the individual you're dealing with. I'll say a couple things. I have seen leadership who have unresolved issues. Okay. They have unresolved issues of their own and they're very uncomfortable. And some of the pastors I've had in the past, one was that he had the voice against homosexuality like you'd never believe. He was like the golden boy against, he had that issue himself. So sometimes the very things we're screaming about are hidden things we're battling ourselves. Not all the time, but there is some truth in that. And so I think that people are uncomfortable with it. I've had people come to me and say, I've confided in my pastor. He says, I shouldn't have this problem. I shouldn't be dealing with this. But the reality, you are having this problem. Dealing with it. Right. And so I have felt I have been the oddball since my healing journey started in 93. Once you've encountered healing and a really life transformation, you don't really fit with a traditional church anymore. Because most of them weren't operating that way. Some of them were, but most of them still aren't. And a lot of it's based on works, external works, and not anything internal. right? So if I can be here pointing to everybody what they need to do to change
Mm-hmm.
and not look at myself, and that's where a lot of energy is being placed today. You're not getting this right. If you're going to be a Christian, then you do this, you cross this, dot this I, cross this T, and you have not looked at yourself.
Right.
And God wants us to look at ourselves first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? We're to reflect, we're to look into him as a mirror and allow him to reflect what needs to be changed, rearranged, left, so he can impart into us. Yeah.
Yeah.
So those are some of my thoughts on that.
Yeah. So
I love how your healing journey has it's been like it's layers.
Mm-hmm.
Because we've heard that like healing is like pulling back the layers, and that's exactly what you're explaining. It's that it's been a little here, a little there, a little here, and God is just perfecting that healing process little by little for you to be able to share your story and really thrive in life. So I love that.
And I think that's a great way of putting it, KJ. When I first started, it seemed like I cried all the time. It seemed like, and someone gave me the analogy, just like what you were talking about, the layering of the onion. And think about when you're peeling an onion and you peel it more and more, you cry more and more, right? So until you get to the core. So my healing was a lot. I felt like I cried oceans of tears the first couple of years because it was so much loss. With so much grieving and loss that I had to face. What do you do when your narrative, you're not who you thought you were, and so the narrative that you had scripted or your family origin has scripted for you, that's not who you are. Mm-hmm. So it was such a dismantling, a breaking down of faulty foundations in order to rebuild the truth of who I am. And that just really took some time for me. And I'll tell you, my husband says to this day, it's so funny, he'll say, well, because there's a part in the book, and I'll say this, that there was a scene that Marcia had that Tony witnessed where she regressed as a child, and it just freaked him out. And, afterwards, he's just saying, I don't know who you're going to be when this is all over. Mm-hmm. And, her response to him was like, well, I don't want to be who I was when we first got married. And I don't know who I'm going to be. I don't want to be. But when this is all over, I become who I feel God has always wanted me to be.
Yeah.
And so my husband says, he's married to wife number 3 now, and I'm the best of all 3. He's so glad he hung around for the 3rd one.
I love that.
That's good though. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the freedom of that healing journey is I mean, the consequences are great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
and there are risks. When you choose to follow truth, you may lose some relationships along the way. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
And close ones.
Uh-huh.
So when I felt God giving me an invitation to face my past and my truth, it was almost like scripture says, forsake all to follow him.
Yeah.
And so I was going to follow him because I had such tangible encounters with his love that drew me deeper, and I wasn't going to give that up for anyone.
Yeah. That's so
love that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Now, because you're my friend and we have talked, I know that dreams are a very big part of your life.
Yes.
Tell me more about that, because you have actually, you're the one who encouraged me. And so I dream a lot. Not the way you do, but I dream a lot. And so I do write them down most of the time. And then I ask myself some things about them, because I want to know, just a dream because, I had ice cream before I went to sleep, or was it a dream that has a meaning or a warning or a whatever, an uncovering, whatever that might look like. Okay. So you tell me more, because I love it when you talk about that.
Well, that was on my list to talk about too. So I'm glad you brought it up first.
Good.
Yeah. I just want to share like dreams, how they play such an integral part in my life. I remember as a little girl, my mother would say to me, when you wake up in the morning, just sit on the side of your bed and just think about what you dreamed. And I never thought about how that was going to impact my life, until as I've gotten older. And I had learned a few years ago that my grandmother had the gift of dreams. And she would have dreams about things that would come to pass. And I had that prophetic gift in my dreams. So I wanted to kind of preface it with that. When I talk about like the different places the colorful places I've been, a lot of it was activated through a dream. I came into I accepted Jesus through a dream. He came to me, appeared to me in a dream. And that's how I I didn't even know what I dreamt was in the Bible, and I didn't know it. So it was very, very real. And then as time went on, like, how I got into trafficking? Well, I had a dream in the 90s where I was in Africa rescuing kids, and I wrote that dream down. I knew sometimes there's a feeling about the dream that there's a weight to it. That's the only way I can explain it. And when that happens, I write those. I don't write all of them down, but those are the ones I write down. So I wrote that down, but it would be 20 years later that the fulfillment of that dream would happen. And I received an invitation to go to Uganda to work with kids who had been rescued from the Lord's Resistance Army, child trafficking. And when I was there those 3 weeks, the way God orchestrated that was just really divine. I was there 3 weeks, and during that 3-week period, I saw a lot of miracles, did a lot of ministry. I came back, and that's when the Lord laid on my heart to go back to college, master's, and I did all my research on human trafficking. So that's how that pivoted. And once I was in that realm, the door opened up, and I didn't even know at that time that I was a victim of trafficking. I started training. I was training on human trafficking awareness for almost 2 years before I sat into a national conference. And I heard the definition of child exploitation, which is part of human trafficking. And it hit me like a 2x4. Oh my God, that's me. Because of my childhood, I was exposed to child pornography in the Philippines, and I was a victim of that. So it's just how God uses that dream to pivot for me is I feel is amazing. So I had that dream showing me that going into the human trafficking, anti-trafficking work was my next step. I've had quite a few number of dreams, maybe about different people or healing. I'll give you another example of a healing dream. I was ministering at the time, doing a lot of women's conferences and speaking. And my ministry is healing. I have the gift of healing, which came after my own healing.
Right.
After I walked through my stuff, all of a sudden I woke up, and when I prayed for people, healing would manifest in their bodies and different things like that. So I had a dream where I saw someone suffering, and I just became angry in the dream because I'm thinking, Jesus came so we didn't have to suffer like that. And I had a fireball in my hand. And so I threw the fireball at the person, and the person was released from their healing. So it was like God teaching me another healing modality, spiritual healing modality. It was a few weeks later, I was invited to speak at a women's group, minister at a women's group. And I did the teaching. I've learned to wait after ministering a message to see, because God is often already working. And I saw him on a person and working, ministering to her, and I could feel a fireball in my hand. And I'd never experienced that before. And so I said, okay, Lord, this is how he teaches me. I go, okay, I'm going to throw it, but how can I do this so nobody can tell? So I just kind of brought my hand back a little bit, like you do a bowling ball a little bit, and then I just kind of flung it. Oh my goodness. And when I did it, the lady flew back. And all this deliverance began to happen and healing. And I found that lady later from the pastor. She was a survivor of ritual abuse. And God did a major healing work. She was seeing a counselor, but she was stuck in the area of, and that just broke things up where she could continue on with her healing. So he teaches me, he shows me things. And then I love to release what I learn when I teach on dreams or what things. I love to release and teach what I've learned to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started that dream, understanding dreams. I think about 2007 is when I started the workshops and everything on that. And I'll tell you this, it's always amazing when people say they tell me they don't dream. And I said, oh, you do dream. You just don't remember your dreams, but everybody dreams, scientifically proven. And so we'll pray over that person. They'll come back the next day and they'll have this remarkable dream.
Right.
And every time I've had a group of people in a seminar and they bring forth the dreams, it's always amazing to see how the Holy Spirit gives the interpretation. And I've had people weeping in the revelation they've received healing through the dream that it's been reoccurring in their lives, and they finally got the revelations of that dream. So it's such a tool, an avenue in which God desires to speak to his creation, but we're not really taught that here in the Western world.
Yeah. Yeah, it's too new agey.
Yeah, it's too new agey. I guess I'm a new ager then, huh?
Me too. Me too. I just think that God allows us to experience him in what we might seem as ridiculous ways. You know, a fireball in your hand, right?
Yeah.
Right. Because it's how we learn to trust him and see him at work.
It is.
It builds our faith. You didn't need a fireball in your hand to lay hands on her and for him to heal her. He didn't need to use you at all for him to do that. You know, I think that he just, when we're aware of how he's working, when we give him credit for working, we see him work more.
Yes.
And I think he uses those things, you know, it's kind of like, do you trust me with the silly things? Because I'm going to show you, you know, how great I am. Like how, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think
I agree with you.
But I think you get what I'm trying to say.
I get what you're saying. And I think that's so true because honestly, I think as we grow more and more and go deeper in him, however you want to say it, however you want to express it, he breaks you out of that mold that you have been in or that frame of reference.
Yeah.
And he will continue to do that. If we're growing, we shouldn't be where we were 10 years ago,
right,
or 20 years ago.
Right.
I mean, if we had children and our children were still sucking their thumb at 30 years old, what would we say? Right. So it's just
okay, listeners, I know you don't get to see that, but as soon as she said that, KJ's head jerked. Like, what?
Snatch that finger out of his mouth.
But I think in the
right.
church, we're still changing baby diapers because we're not empowering the people to listen, finding God for themselves. No, they're supposed to listen to the preacher at the head of the pulpit, and only he can hear from God. And we better just be doing what he says to do. That's not how the Holy Spirit operates.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think that was the pivoting point in my relationship with Christ, was when I began to believe his word, that he says, I speak to my sheep hear my voice. And I really took that and began to just practicing simple exercises, and I was blown away.
Yeah.
He speaks to little old me, right?
Right.
But all of us are important to him.
Yes.
Right? He doesn't love anyone. All of us. He loves each one of his children, his creation, and desires that closeness. And so a lot of the training that I've done about hearing God is just helping people to recognize it's him speaking. They're already hearing him. They just don't know.
Right.
It's the truth.
Yeah, for sure. That is one of the main points that I try to teach my students every year is to learn to hear God's voice for yourself, because it was one of the greatest and most difficult seasons when I really started doing that for myself, because what I was hearing was not what was being said to me.
Yes.
And so learning to trust God's voice within,
Yes.
there's cost to that.
Yes, there is.
Yeah, because you're no longer, status quo. You're no longer just going with the flow, because that's what everybody's going with the flow, because the flow wasn't working anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it wasn't helping me. It wasn't helping a lot of people. It wasn't helping me. But the flow was used for control and manipulation. And I've seen a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another podcast.
It sure is.
Yes.
Write
Write that down. That's another.
It's on
really
the list.
Yeah, it's on the
list. Yeah.
I do. I want to take this time when we're talking about hearing from God is to make sure that our listeners know that when you are desperately seeking the voice of God, the only way to hear it is to spend time with him.
Yes.
I mean, I remember the first time. I mean, there were many times when I would question whether it was God or not.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And I think that was because I was so new at the relationship. Like I wasn't certain it was his voice, but I had to come out of the four walls of the church, because sometimes what I thought I heard was a leader in the church. And it was that voice and those words. And God has ministered to me enough now to know that he speaks to me in my language.
Yes.
Right. In my language.
Yes.
And he will speak to me as much as I speak to him. So I hope that encourages others that are listening today, that if you are seeking the voice of the Lord in your life, the best way to start is to get still and start having a relationship with him.
Right.
And even on that note, it's so good, KJ, I want to piggyback on that when you talk, just get still, be still. I'm going to tell you, when I first started years ago, I'd sit down, I have a notepad, and I'd be still, because I was taking that scripture, be still, know that I'm God. Right. So I would do that. And then I'd hear, oh, I got laundry to do. I got this to do. I mean, I'm just going to tell you all the things that I had. And I just learned to kind of jot that down. Okay, that's going to happen.
Right.
When you first start. And that's okay. And then as time went on, it just was like, you start getting into the flow and what works for you. Some people hear from him running, jogging, spending time with him jogging. It looks different. I find now, I used to do a lot in my bedroom, and now I find it's not so much my bedroom like it was for years. I'll be outside riding my bike when I get a lot of thoughts, and I have to be careful because I'll be trying to talk in my oh gosh, what's that called? But my voice thing, and trying to capture those thoughts while they're coming. But so it's kind of changing for me. But for a long time, that's how I would spend time with him.
For me, it's road trips, or excuse me, if I'm in the car by myself, that's when, or in the shower.
That's a good place. That's a good place to sing too.
It is. We all sound good in the shower, don't we?
Right? Yeah, those are the two places. And that's what I tell kids. When I teach, not kids, they're teenagers, but that's what I tell my students too, is learning to hear God's voice, because they're like, what does it sound like? I said, it sounds like you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like you. So how do you know the difference between God's voice and, something, we'll say the enemy? Okay.
Right.
It aligns with his character. It aligns with what you know of Jesus of the New Testament. Like it aligns. It's not contrary to. And that's when you learn to trust it. And ask for confirmation if you're not sure. He's good that way.
Oh, I've done that so many times, asking, especially for big decisions, right? It's okay. Now, as time goes on, and sometimes they'll say, okay, now daughter, it's kind of like, but at first he's so gracious to us, right?
Yeah.
That's beautiful. And I think that point of getting to know his character, that the New Testament and everything, you're not going to know him apart from that.
Right.
So you have to discern, right, the different voices that come, because there are different voices that come.
Yeah.
There are different voices that come. Yes.
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 Yeah. And one other thing I want to share too, he doesn't just come in voice also, he comes in pictures. Like
Yeah.
we've had times, there have been times that you're praying, all of a sudden you get this picture. When I would do exercises with people that would come to my conferences, I said, well, it might come in a voice, but you might get a picture, you might even get a color. Yeah.
Mhm.
And so we practice those exercises, we pray, and then we say, okay, what are you hearing? What are you seeing? Or sometimes people get a sensation, a feeling. So learning, because everyone is different. Some people get more pictures than words.
Mhm.
And like, I think KJ, you hit the nail on the head. He speaks to us in our language. Some of us are auditory learners. Some of us are visual learners.
Right.
Right. Mhm.
Right.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
cool.
That's so good. So good. Okay, so your book comes out. Tell us again.
April 21st is our launch date.
Okay.
And they can, pre-orders are available now. So my website is chandramoyer.com. So they can order off that. They can find me on Instagram also and Facebook.
Okay.
So those pre-orders are, at least for the ebook. Amazon doesn't do pre-orders for paperback, but everything will be released on 21st. And we have a launch party on the 21st. So I'm so excited about that.
So will that be virtual?
Yes,
Yeah.
a virtual launch party. Yeah, not quite ready for the in-house yet.
I know.
That's coming soon, though. Hopefully
I
soon.
hope so too. Okay, and for our listeners, we'll include all of those links in the show notes as well, so you'll be able to find her and connect with her. Okay.
So I have a question.
Uh-huh.
What would you want the audience to take away from our conversation today?
I really want them to know how much they're loved.
That's so good. Yeah.
You know, how much God's loves them, and that, we always talk about, the joy of the Lord is our strength, but I want the audience to know that we are his joy.
Yes.
We are his joy. And it's just like, how a father is when he sees his daughter or son, and he's ecstatic. He's ecstatic to have us around. And I also just want them to know, to give those who are hurting right now and feeling like things are never going to change, because I know what that feels like. I want to encourage them to hang on and to reach out, to not to suffer in silence and alone. There are people out there willing to help you.
Yeah.
There are people out there willing to help and that care about your life, and your life matters.
Yes.
And you have an impact on this world that no one else can have. And so I always tell people are waiting for you on the other side of your pain. There's purpose.
Yeah.
There's really purpose for each one of our lives.
Yeah. That's so powerful.
That's so good. Yeah. People are waiting for you on the other side of your pain. The world needs what you have.
Yes.
On the other side of your pain.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, that's deep. I love that. Yeah. So we have some rapid fire questions that we ask all of our ladies. It's fun. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
When you need to be brave but feel fear, what do you do?
That's a good question. I tend to just rapidly say who I am, like, I can do this. I do some mantras, like if something really came unexpectedly, I always say to myself, okay, this is no surprise to God, maybe a shock to me, but it's no surprise to him. And I am made to do this. I can overcome whatever I'm being faced with. So I remind myself that I am brave and that I am strong, even though I may be shaking in my boots.
Love it.
Hey, that's really the definition of being courageous, is being scared out of your shoes. And
yes.
Anyway.
And you do it, and you do it anyway. So many times I have just stepped off cliffs. I feel that way with this book. Am I a little apprehensive? Oh, I was. Oh my goodness. I just felt like I was getting ready to jump off this cliff, and you feel very vulnerable. exposing yourself into this, I do, in this new way. But I have done enough things in my life that I've done afraid.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I tell people all the time, if you're waiting not to feel afraid, you're not going to take that first step. You just have that Nike logo. It says, just do it. You do it, and you do it afraid.
Yeah.
That's good.
Mm-hmm.
That's so good. That's great advice.
It is.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I probably needed to hear that too. What's on your nightstand right now?
Well, I have a book I'm reading right now. My husband had finished it, so I promised him I would read it. It's called Eating Smart, and it's by Sean Stevenson. It's an excellent book. Oh my gosh, he's got humor in his book. But we're at this age in our lives that we're trying to be more mindful with our eating, and we want to leave a legacy for our grandchildren and live a healthy, long life. So we are mindful in our eating, what we're taking in. And some of the things we've been taught through the years hasn't been right. Science has changed. And I have a little pocket watch on my nightstand as well, and that I love, that was given to me as a gift. And that's in the end of the story of my book. You read it. I'm not going to say what it says on it. So if you read the book, you'll find out what it says.
Oh, that's exciting. I'm going to have to look.
And I have, that's your motivation there. And then I have a tissue box.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. What advice would you give your younger self in 2 sentences?
I would say to her, it's okay to be afraid. Because I felt I had to be strong all the time. And I would also say to her, you don't have to be perfect.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot of us could include that if we were to give advice to our younger self. Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This has been fun. I have no idea how this is going to sound at the end, but I'm looking forward to it.
Oh, we're super excited. Listen, we're still winging this thing. So, hey, look, it's been amazing. Thank you so much for your time, really. Listeners, we will include in our show notes the ways that you can get in contact, or how you can order your book or pre-order your book, the name of the book, and all of the everything you need in order to be connected. And so we just thank you so much for your time. We thank you for your heart. We thank you for sharing your story. We just believe that when people listen to this, that they will experience, oh my goodness, like healing and freedom and knowledge and compassion and empathy and open hearts and open minds. And so I think one of the biggest things that I've been saying the last 6 or 8 months is that when we have no context for a thing, that we don't really know that it's going on. But just because we don't have context for a thing doesn't mean it's not going on. And so this is one of those areas that I had no context about. And so thank you for sharing.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I love being with you ladies.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Same here.
Always a pleasure. Yeah. Have a good day. Thank you. Love you.
All right. Thank you, listeners. Hey, you guys, we just want to say thank you today. We want to thank our listeners and those of you that have subscribed to the Simple Conversations podcast. We want to thank our sound and production team for all of their hard work behind the scenes. That would be Tim and Alyssa Ranker. And we also want to give a big shout out to CMS Mortgage Solutions and our friend Karina Carter, because without her, it would be really challenging for us to make this podcast. So keep listening and share it with your friends. Thanks.
Hey y'all, this is KJ from Simple Conversations Where Grace Meets Strength. Thank y'all so much for listening and tuning in. If it weren't for y'all, there would be no reason for us to do this. Listen, we need your help. We need your support. So head on over to patreon.com/Simple Conversations and decide exactly how you want to be involved. For $5 a month, you would get access to behind the scenes content. For $25 a month, you would get that as well as a shout out on the podcast or fan input. As a supporter for $50 a month, you would get all that in the previous two tiers, as well as a one-time gift or book that Alice and I have read or are reading that we think would add value to your life. Or for $100 a month, we consider you family. You ever heard that before? That's friends that are so good that we consider you family. So you would get everything in the previous three tiers, as well as exclusive branded merchandise from Simple Conversations. So listen, our heart's desire is to do more and to be more. And so in order for us to do that, we need help. And so we're dependent on you to help us make that happen. So thanks for tuning in and thanks for your support. See y'all.